Well, welcome to Richie's Roost at Shaco, Mississippi, out in my outdoor studio. Warn you before we get started in this one, I got a neighbor that's got some heavy equipment running over just north of me here. So if you hear it, just disregard it. He's got some stuff he's got to get done, and that suits me. I'd like for him to get it done too if he feels like he needs to. So, the week of the elections is past. I don't know about you, but I'm glad to see it. I'm tired of watching just commercials about candidates and sandwiched in between the My Pillow commercials. I thought, though, that with all the heavy stuff about the elections that we've been hearing for the last 6 months, I might come up with one election story that might have a little different wrinkle that you might like, and we'll talk about that one. Before we get to it, there's a story background to it, like most of my stories are. So we'll go through that, and then we'll get to what the election part of it looks like. Now, Western stagecoach companies were big business in the latter half of the 19th century. In addition to passengers and freight, stages hauled gold and silver bullion as well as mining company payrolls in the stagecoaches. Stagecoach robbery was a constant danger, and bandits employed many strange and ambushed stagecoach. Thieves were rarely met with much resistance because the drivers had the passengers' safety foremost in mind always. The gang was usually after the Wells Fargo money and valuable contents of the box anyway. So the passengers were seldom hurt, but they were certainly relieved of their cash and watches and jewelry. But before completion of the Transcontinental Railroad over Donner Pass in 1868, the only transportation through the Sierras was by stagecoach. Well, now, there were rugged teamsters held rein over 6 wild-eyed horses while they tore along the precipitous mountain trails. They were dangerous to drive sometimes. Now, the stagecoaches were driven by skilled and fearless men who, they pushed themselves and their spirited horses a lot of times to the limit. Now, one of the most famous drivers was Charles Darky Pinehurst, who had come from New England in 1852 seeking his fortune in the gold rush. Now, he spent 15 years running stages, sometimes partnering with Hank Monk, the celebrated driver from Carson City. And over the years, Parkhurst's reputation as an expert whip grew. I'm talking about the big popping whips, okay? As a matter of fact, from 20 feet, 20 feet away from his target, he could slice open the end of an envelope or cut a cigar out of a man's mouth with that whip. Parkhurst smoked cigars, chewed wads of tobacco, and drank with the best of them, and exuded supreme confidence behind the reins when he was holding them. His judgment was sound, and his pleasant manners won him a lot of friends. Well, one afternoon, as Charlie drove down from Carson Pass, the lead horses veered off of the road. They just scooted off of the road, which left the stagecoach running sort of sideways. Charlie it threw him out of the rig, and he hung on to the reins, and the horses dragged him along on his stomach, running. Well, amazingly, he managed to steer the frightened horses back onto the road and save all the grateful passengers. I bet they were talking about a ride they'd made then. With him dragging on his stomach out there, holding the reins, and them trying to hang on to the stagecoach. I bet that was a sight to be seen. Anyway, during the 1950s, bands of highwaymen stalked the roads. Robbers. These outlaws would level their shotguns at stage drivers and shout, "Throw down the gold box." Well, Charlie Parkhurst had no patience for the crooks, despite their demands and threatening gestures. Well, about this time, when he was driving that stagecoach, the most notorious road agent was nicknamed Sugarfoot. Why, I have no idea. But Sugarfoot was a bad character. And when he and his gang accosted Charlie's stage one day, it was the last robbery that the thief ever attempted. Charlie cracked his whip, and when his horses bolted, he cracked the whip out over the horses, and when they bolted, its stage ran by the outlaws. He turned around and fired his revolver at the crooks. Sugarfoot was later found dead with a fatal bullet in his stomach. And in appreciation for his bravery, Wells Fargo presented Parkhurst with a large watch and chain made out of solid gold. In 1865, Parkhurst grew tired of the demanding job, I would imagine he did, of driving, and he opened his own stage station. And he later sold that business and retired to a ranch out near Soquel, California. I think that's the way you pronounce it, Soquel, California. Well, the years slipped by, and Charlie died on December the 29th, 1879, at the age of 67. A few days later, the Sacramento Daily Bee published his obituary, and it read, as I'll read to you. On Sunday last, there died a person known as Charlie Parkhurst, aged 67, who was well known to old residents as a stage driver. He was in early days accounted one of the most expert manipulators of the reins who ever sat in the box of a coach. It was discovered when friendly hands were preparing him for his final rest that Charlie Parkhurst was unmistakably a well-developed woman. Well, once it was discovered that Charlie was a woman, there were plenty of people to say that they'd always thought that he wasn't really like other men. Now, even though he wore leather gloves summer and winter, many noticed that his hands were small and smooth. He always slept in the stables with his horses and was never known to have had a girlfriend. I guess probably not. Charlie never volunteered clues to her past. Loose-fitting clothing hid her femininity, and after a horse kicked her, an eye patch on one eye helped cover her face. She weighed 175 pounds, could handle herself in a fist fight, and drank whiskey like one of the boys. It turns out that Charlie's real name was Charlotte Parkhurst, and she's abandoned as a child. She was raised in a New Hampshire orphanage, unloved and surrounded by poverty. Charlotte ran away at the age of 15 years and soon discovered that life in the working world was easier for men. So she decided to masquerade as one for the rest of her life. And the rest is history. Well, almost. There is one last thing that does have to do with elections. On November the 3rd, 1868, Charlotte Parkhurst cast her vote in the national election dressed as a man. She became then the first woman to vote in the United States 52 years before Congress passed the 19th Amendment, giving American women the right to vote. And you know, when I saw this, I got to wondering under today's conditions if the guy who lost that election where she voted could find him a really smart lawyer and contest that election because there was an illegal vote there. No, it may have. In any case, I thought with all the election stories going around, you might enjoy this one. I did. Enjoyed reading it. We'll get back to other things, I guess, next week. So, until then, I'm Jim Ritchie, and I'll see you again next time.